Happy Saturday, everyone. My name is Damon Levine, and I'm a facilitator here at PRUDE. I want to welcome you to our ongoing online Black History Month speaker series. This is a series of free, interactive online talks by presenters from around the province who will share stories on many subjects related to both Black history in New Brunswick and the present-day Black community. So this will include talks on subjects ranging from Black loyalists and Black refugees to famous firsts and entrepreneurship, personal uplift, and even poetry reading. So today's guest grew up in Carlingford, which is a small farming community in northwestern New Brunswick, which shares an international border with Fort Fairfield, Maine. A lifelong art and history buff, his interest in New Brunswick Black heritage was piqued when he learned about the Underground Railroad that passed right through his own backyard. Since 2013, JoeGee has organized the Thomason Lake Hike to Freedom, an annual event that takes place along North America's northernmost route of the Underground Railroad. Joe has also extended his research in search of Black burial sites and has taken part in many historical projects that create an awareness of Black history. Today, he'll be talking about that very Underground Railroad in New Brunswick. It is my honor to welcome Mr. JoeGee. Hi, Joe.
Hey, thanks, Damon.
You're welcome.
So I guess today we're going to be talking about the Underground Railroad that came to New Brunswick. But before we get started on that, I'd just like to name drop Robin Stanley from the Unitarian Fellowship of Fredericton. I was supposed to do a presentation for their church services, but due to COVID-19 restrictions, I'm hoping that your congregation will be able to use the YouTube video instead. So I hope that does some justification and for my absence. I'd also like to say thank you to Lee Song, Damon, everyone from PRUDE, as well as the sponsors for all the hard work putting this series together. I think this is really great. I think when February was coming around, so used to traveling around and going to different places, visiting schools, visiting churches, doing presentation type events. I was kind of wondering how this was going to roll out. So when Lee Song got in touch with me and explained everything that was that was in the works for this online presentation, I thought that was just great. So thank you guys for all your hard work. Just to get started, thanks for the introduction. I guess that pretty well sums everything up. Why I'm interested in the Underground Railroad that brought many Black families to New Brunswick. I grew up right there where it happened, and it was back in forget what it was. I was a kid when I first learned about it. There was two researchers or two historians from Fort Fairfield, Maine. Art and Ruth Mraz, and it's because of their hard work and their dedication that history is preserved. There's others as well, but the two folks that I got in contact with was mainly Ruth and Art, and so they just live a stone throw away from where I live, but of course we had the border between us, and it was in 2013 that I got in touch with Art. And explained that I wanted to that I had an interest in this local history, and explained that I wanted to take that research that they had begun and keep on carrying it, keep on researching it, and kind of bring it to life and share that knowledge with everyone who wants to learn about it. So I guess everybody is familiar with the Underground Railroad, and basically, essentially what it was a series or a network of safe houses and conductors, people who worked on the Underground Railroad, to help a lot of Black fugitives or Black families escape slavery in the South. So during the Underground Railroad didn't really reach as far north as Canada in the very beginning. So what happened was a lot of northern states were free states, slavery had already been abolished while there was still slavery in Upper Canada, in Upper and Lower Canada, mainly, like, for instance, Vermont. Vermont was one of the first places in North America to abolish slavery. So we had a lot of black families were escaping southern states and making their way to northern states as those northern states abolished slavery. So we had a lot of black fugitives that were seeking refuge in places like Pennsylvania, Vermont, New York, Massachusetts. But there was a lot of turmoil that was going on between northern states and southern states. And in 1850, the northern states, so tensions were becoming greater. And the northern states and the southern states had a compromise, and they made what was called the Compromise Bill of 1850. And what that did was that added new teeth to the already existing slave laws of 1793, that made it legal for anybody to apprehend a person that they suspected of being a fugitive slave, and taken to a court or taken before a judge without any witnesses or without any evidence. And most of the times, that person who was apprehended was sent back to the South or sold into slavery. So the Compromise Bill of 1850 added new teeth to the already existing fugitive slave law, and it made it now legal for bounty hunters from southern states to come to northern states to apprehend, capture, and basically take back to the South. In a lot of cases, they weren't even taken back. A lot of cases, just free blacks were even kidnapped and taken to the southern states and sold into slavery. So after 1850, a lot of free blacks and a lot of black fugitives were no longer safe. So they had to pick things back up, and they had to go further north to Canada. And one of those places was New Brunswick. And we really don't hear a lot about New Brunswick. When we think of the Underground Railroad, we usually hear about places like Ontario or Nova Scotia. And the reason being is because the Underground Railroad was so secret that very little evidence exists today that helps researchers figure out what exactly happened, and basically makes it easy for us to research that history. So a lot of what we rely on today is basically oral history. So let me see here. I think we could change the slide. So this slide here talks about the fugitive slave laws, and I think I already mentioned that. Compromise Bill of 1850. We could probably go to the next slide. So our local history with the Underground Railroad kind of begins at Fringe Church. So Fringe Church was the very last stop for a lot of these black families who were escaping being caught by bounty hunters. I believe that the checkpoint before Fringe Church would have been in Brewer, Maine, at the what's the name of that house? It's in Brewer, Maine. The Holyoakes. John Holyoke lived in Brewer, Maine. And he had a big house, and he was an abolitionist, and he was also a conductor of the Underground Railroad. So he had a secret tunnel that went from a riverbank to below his house, where that's how he would bring black fugitives to his house, and he would keep them safe until it was safe to go further north. And I think it was in the early 90s, I believe it was, that they found the evidence that they needed basically, what they were doing was tearing down the house. Unfortunately, at that time, it was just oral history. They thought that it was a safe house, and it wasn't until they actually found garments that would have been worn by a plantation worker, that they realized that that was the evidence that proved that that house actually was a safe house. So if you go to Brewer today, they tore the house down to improve an intersection. So right beside that intersection, you'll see a park, and there's a statue of a black gentleman coming out of a tunnel, and he's looking north towards Canada, or even towards French Church. So we have French Church. French Church was built by Quakers. It was built by Joseph Wingate Haynes and other Quakers in 1859, and the building of the church was completed in 1860. And they used this church as a safe house and a hiding place for a lot of those black fugitives who had either escaped slavery or was making their way from other states like Pennsylvania or New York, from people who were fugitives for many years before that. And it was, I think it was in the late 1990s that they found the evidence that proved that actually was a safe house. When they was making renovations to the stage inside the church, they pulled back an old carpet, and sure enough, they found a hidden room below that stage. So we have Joseph Wingate Haynes and his wife Mary, and of course, as mentioned before, they were abolitionists, as most Quakers were. They were also conductors of the Underground Railroad, and they helped a lot of black families escape to northern Canada. And then up here, you'll see on this storyboard, we talk about Sergeant William Tomlinson, and that's where the Tomlinson Lake gets its name, because they were the first family to make their home around that lake. And Sergeant William Tomlinson was a former West India Ranger who served in the Napoleonic Wars, who came up the St. John River in, I believe it was 1819, and then he settled around the lake in 1820. And so it would have been like 30 years after that, after they'd lived there, they would have been contacted by Joseph Wingate Haynes, and probably made some kind of a deal to help these black families that were crossing from Fort Fairfield, Maine, into Carlingford, New Brunswick. So they would have been the first family that these black families would have met upon coming to New Brunswick. What makes Tomlinson Lake important is because it was a landmark back in those days. Because back in the mid 1800s, there would have been nothing on that border separating New Brunswick and Maine to indicate to anybody where that border actually was. So they used that lake as a landmark, and the Quakers would explain to those black families to follow the moose trails and follow the brook until you get to Tomlinson Lake. When you get to Tomlinson Lake, you'll know that you're free. So that's the significance and the importance of Tomlinson Lake today, is that years ago, it was that landmark that would have, let those families know that they were in Canada and they were now safe. Down at the bottom right-hand corner of the storyboard, you'll see a gentleman by the name of James Fitzherbert, who was born in Andover in 1818. He was a blacksmith and a farmer, and he traveled up the Aroostook River in the mid-1800s, and he would have built a blacksmith shop and tavern that he used during the Pork and Beans War, also known as the Aroostook War, when there was turmoil between Britain and the United States over where that border lays. And at that time, he built a secret room behind a wall and a woodshed, and he would use that secret room to hide British soldiers. And this is all oral history. I have yet to find any evidence to prove that this is true, but sometimes oral history is all we got to go with. So he used that hidden room to hide British soldiers during the Pork and Beans War, and later it is believed that he used that same hidden room to hide fugitive slaves. And when it was still dark, just as the sun was coming up, it was still dark. It is believed that he would hide these families on a cart covered with straw, and he would drive his cart up the Sam Everett Road, which runs parallel with the road that I live on today, which is the Glenburn Road, and he would drop them off where the Thomason Lake Brook crosses that road, and they would follow that brook all the way to Thomason Lake. So let me see. So we could probably go to the next slide. And here we have codes and quilt patterns. We also have, there's a song there that talks about how a lot of the black families would sing songs that were actually code. And this one here is Follow the Drinking Gourd, which is basically a song that lets people know to follow the North Star. And it'll take you to the Promised Land, which is basically, I guess, Canada in this case. I think that's the last slide for that. We could probably just leave that up, though, for our viewers who might be interested in codes and quilts and songs. So I just want to take a few moments to talk about our annual event. It's the Thomason Lake Hike to Freedom, and it's usually the first Saturday or the first weekend in October, which usually falls on the same week as Health and Wellness Week. And there's a hiking trail about 3 kilometers long that goes one way. So our participants park close to the border. We do this without crossing the border, I should say, but we park close to the border. Our parking lot is just probably less than a half of a kilometer away from that line between New Brunswick and Maine. And then we walk down to the brook, and then from there we follow a footpath that goes all the way to the lake. And along that footpath we have interpretive signs. We've started construction of a squatter's cabin, and we also have a pit house that would have been the home to a lot of black loyalist families that would have already been living here in New Brunswick at that time during the Underground Railroad. The squatter's cabin is something. It's an important aspect of the whole trail, because the question that I'm asked most, besides I thought there was never slavery in Canada, but the second question I'm asked most is, where did these black families go once they came to Canada? So when these families came to Canada, we have to remember that just because slavery was abolished 30 years prior to it being abolished in the States, racism was still rampant. Like black men and women and children were still not equal. They were merely coming here as refugees to escape being caught by bounty hunters and being either killed or taken back and sold into slavery. So a lot of these families had no other choice but to find a plot of land out in the middle of the woods, and with what little tools they had, construct a small cabin. And so that's what we've been working on for the last 2 years. Construction is still ongoing with that, and but we're hoping to have that finished before this year's hiking event. And hopefully, if we're through COVID-19 and we can look back and just get on with our lives, we'll be able to have another hiking event, and people will be able to come and see that cabin. The other thing too is that our hiking trail is open all season, so it's open spring, summer, and fall. So families and people who are interested in coming and experiencing that trail, visiting the squatter's cabin, visiting the pit house, they can come any day they want to go hike it. There's placards on the trees so that people can't get lost. They keep following the placards. There's a sign at the parking lot for that indicates that people can park there, and from there all you got to do is follow the placards. Trying to think if I missed anything. I have some notes here. but I think I've got everything. I think I have everything covered, Damon.
Excellent, Joe. Thank you very much for that very engaging presentation, and it's actually generated quite a few questions. So I'm just going to start now. Mona would like to know if there's any way that she can get a copy of your presentation. Is there any way that what you've just shown here, your PowerPoint presentation, is that something that
that's something that is accessible online. So if Mona is interested in the storyboards, if she's interested in that, she can either find that online. I think I have it posted on there on one of the Facebook pages. We have a Facebook page called the Thompson Lake Hike to Freedom, and she can send a message. I'll get that message, and then I can give her whatever information that she likes.
So Mona should go to the Tomlinson Lake Hike to Freedom Facebook page, and you'll contact her there.
Yes, or she can email me at Tomlinson Lake Hike to Freedom at gmail.com.
Tomlinson Lake Hike to Freedom at gmail.com.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. Very good, Mona. I hope you heard that. Thank you very much. Joe, got a question from Brenda, who says that she heard from a friend in St. Andrews a few years ago that there's a house on US Route 1. In Robinson. Yeah, that served as a safe. Is there any truth to that? Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, that's true. I haven't been there yet, but I've done quite a bit of reading on it, and so that's actually a real important part of New Brunswick history and how it relates to the Underground Railroad, because there was actually, I believe, there was two paths that came from Brewer, Maine. One split and went north to Fort Fairfield. The other ones went to the right and followed the coast, and people actually crossed the water from that. I think that place there is an inn now.
Okay.
The last time I was reading about it, it was an inn that belonged to I think the guy was from around here. He bought it. He's either a celloist or a famous violinist. And so in that house was a safe house for fugitive slaves. And again, when it was dark, they would put them in a boat, and then they would cross the bay.
Right.
And they would land that was right directly across from the black community that once existed in St. Andrews, which is now the golf course. And I think Graham Nickerson spoke. I think he spoke yesterday or the day before, and that's something that I believe that he's done some work on.
The black community in St. Andrews that is now the golf course.
Yeah, I think and there's actually a graveyard on the number 2 hole.
Is it still there, or has it been like deconsecrated?
I think that number 2 hole is different now, but I really don't have a lot of information on that. I just know that at that time, back during the days of the Underground Railroad, there was a black community, as a lot of white loyalist communities had their own little black community just on the outskirts of town. It was usually close to where the dumps were.
Sure.
And
of
they
course,
would
right?
Pardon me?
Of course, right? I mean, even though there was a modicum of kindness, it was still like, we're going to put you near the dumps.
Yeah, and they would build their homes out of mill slabs, like the leftover scrap material that nobody wanted to build their homes out of.
Right.
So that's where their community was. So I think Brenda's right, and you can go on, and if she hasn't done so already, she can go online, and if she just types in Robinson, Maine, Underground Railroad, she'll probably find lots of information that talks about that.
Brenda says that on her grandmother's side of the family, one of her relatives was black, and he lived in Elgin, New Brunswick. It shows up in the 1851 census. She'd like to know if there were any resources at the PANB. I don't know what that acronym means. Maybe you can help me there, or anywhere else that she can consult. She's trying to find out more about her family.
Oh, so I think she's talking about the public archives in New Brunswick, which is at UMB.
Uh-huh.
So and I think the name of the community was Elgin, right? Is it Elgin? Elgin?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, yeah. I don't know if there's information there about that, but that's something that, I'm going to make a note of that myself, and I can have a contact there. I can see if maybe there's some information. And does she know the gentleman's name?
I do not know. I'm sure you're listening to this, Brenda. So you might want to contact JoeGee at Tomlinson Lake Hike to Freedom at gmail.com. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay, and also on the Facebook site as well. And then Graham is referring to the graveyard you're talking about. It's in the vicinity of the old poorhouse, he says.
Yeah.
Joe, got a question for you. You talked about symbols. We had black people, fleeing bondage in the States had songs and symbols that they would use that would indicate certain things, on the Underground Railroad. I have heard about the lawn jockey, black lawn jockeys, which are now considered pretty offensive.
Yeah.
But I'd heard a rumor that lawn jockeys were actually signs, and wherever the lawn jockey pointed, if it was like an abolitionist house and they had a lawn jockey outside, then it was like a safety thing. If they pointed one way, that meant go that way, and if it pointed another way. Have you heard anything about this? And if you have, is it true?
I've read some information about that, and I think that was here a couple of years ago that there was a whole thing brought up that those little lawn jockeys were very what's the word I'm looking for?
Insensitive.
They created like an archaic stereotype of how black people would have appeared,
right,
back in those days. And what I've found online, just by researching online, is that a lot of rich families, a lot of rich white families, had jockeys that were black. That would, so if you had someone of importance come to your house or a relative, you'd send your black servant out to take their horse to the barn, water it, look after it, and whatnot. That's where those little statues with the guy holding the lantern, that's where those derive from. Okay. I have heard what you were speaking about, and that's that they were used by people on the Underground Railroad.
Right.
As you can see, it is not on our storyboard. So until someone can show proof or show evidence that actually was used, we probably won't talk about that.
Okay, so you haven't seen any proof that was actually, they were really signs on the Underground Railroad? No,
I have not. A lot of people even contest whether the quilts was actually true. A lot of people say it isn't true. Mm-hmm. Well, regardless if it is or if it isn't, I consider that to be folklore. And that helps tell the story anyways. And quilts and the patterns are a positive thing. And unlike the little statue, that's basically archaic stereotype.
Okay. Joe, what was the extent of bounty hunter activity in New Brunswick and the Maritimes that you've heard about? Was there much?
I believe so. I've heard a story of that there was a black couple, or maybe it was just one person, who was near Fredericton, and I think that they were being pursued by bounty hunters that had crossed the border, which back in that time was against the law. Like, bounty hunters could not come into New Brunswick from the States, but that doesn't mean that they didn't.
Sure, of course.
But there is we have a storyboard on the trail that talks about bounty hunters, and there's a lady called Patty Cannon who was believed to have been born in St. Stephen.
Mm-hmm.
And she used to kidnap free blacks. A lot of cases she would kidnap babies, black babies, and then she would take them south and she would sell them into slavery. And she was right from St. Stephen.
Wow. That's one of the sad facts about the antebellum time when slavery was legal in the U.S. is that you do have more than your fair share of stories like that, where there's somebody who is in this case in St. Stephen in New Brunswick, or from where I'm from, there was a couple, a mixed couple actually. He was white, she was black, at the Pennsylvania border near Delaware, who would capture escaping blacks from the South, from Maryland, and sell them back into slavery for cash. It was just like, unfortunately, human nature sometimes, the worst of human nature can sometimes trump the best of human nature. So these things happen. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and there's a misnomer that I hear a lot from people who like to make arguments about racism and whatnot. They believe that because there was no slavery here, which is another misnomer. They believe that they use the Underground Railroad for their argument to prove that there was no racism here, because there's the Underground Railroad. Like, black families were coming to New Brunswick, they were coming to northern states, so there couldn't have been racism. We saved them during the Civil War. These are all false, and a lot of them are logical fallacies. And for anybody who wants to disagree, all they have to do is look up Malaga Island, which is just off the coast of Maine, and they can find out what happened to that black community in 1911.
Heard about Malaga Island on NPR, Maine's NPR station actually, and it's interesting that to think that there was this island that was populated by blacks or mixed families, but at the time the island was just totally like none of the whites on mainland Maine wanted anything to do with them. They were really sort of cast out there and sort of cast off. Yeah. Joe, Mona wants to know if any of the black people that came through the Underground Railroad, if you know of if any of these families still have a presence in the province. Is that something that can be found out?
In the book called Black Bangor, the author or the historian states in there that 75% of those black families that came to New Brunswick just came here just to seek refuge until things were better in the States. Once slavery was abolished after 1865, 75% of those blacks that came to New Brunswick via the Underground Railroad went back to the States, because that's where their families were, that's where their jobs were, that's where their friends were. So
it's interesting that you mentioned that. That's something we spoke to historian Stephen Davidson over 2 days this week, and he had a lot of information on black loyalists, and I was curious actually about, we knew about the blacks that stuck it out in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, and then we knew about the blacks who left and went to Senegal, but I was always curious about the amount of blacks who maybe went back to the northern states. They wouldn't go back to the southern states, but they went back over the border. So you say roughly 75% of the blacks who came through the Underground Railroad into New Brunswick actually went back into northern states because their families were there.
Well, that's so that'd be like, if you could imagine me or you doing that, if we were having trouble with something and we wanted to get out of here until things subsided, we would just go away for a couple months, and then imagine like, oh, things are good, let's go back. Or kind of like trying to think of a better example, but
it's a refugee situation, right? You don't necessarily want to leave your home country, but maybe there's a war going on and you have to get somewhere to be safe. Totally understood that. That's a great way to describe to sort of really describe how the Underground Railroad operated. I mean, obviously, when it comes to the U.S., most blacks weren't going back to the South at that time, but in Canada, where things might have been a little rough for them, and they didn't have a lot of family around, maybe going back to the northern U.S., Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, and New York might have been a better compromise.
Also, I just want to add too that's the significance of the of our squatters cabin that we're building, because that's what a lot of these families did when they came to New Brunswick. And we know of 3 locations where 3 different families would have done that. One in Upper Kent, although we don't know the exact location. We know it was in Upper Kent. There was a family that built a log cabin there, and they were squatters.
Mm-hmm.
And there was 2 locations just north of Woodstock. One place was in Wilmette, which is just outside between, which is between Waterville and Centerville, and the other one was in Jacksontown. Those exact locations of where those buildings stood, we really don't know, but we do know that the one in Wilmette was on top of a hill, which is now called Bird Hill.
Okay.
And that's the whole purpose of having this squatters cabin on the trail. And we intend to, once it's completed construction, we'll have those storyboards in there that we'll talk about, dive in a little bit deeper. Also, there are some Black families on Tobique First Nations.
Okay.
It was shared with me by several people there that their grandparents shared with them that there are actually Black families that are buried there on Tobique. So that to me, that I can almost see that a lot of these Black families that came this far north might have cohabitated with some of the native tribes in this area. Sure. because they were more accepting than
the white community,
than the white community.
Joe, did any of the Blacks that built these cabins that far north in the province, was it individual Black families, or were there any communities formed, albeit brief communities? Were any communities of Blacks existing up there?
I was told by Art Mraz that they would have built the cabins themselves. So just the family, like it would have been like, mom, pa, or uncle and grandfather or whoever was in that family would have built it themselves. Now we have to remember that just because these people were at one time enslaved doesn't mean that they were uneducated or didn't have skills.
Right. I guess my question was, did any of them form communities? I know they built the cabins individually, but did any, were there several families that got together and form a community that far north?
I don't have any evidence that would suggest that, but if I had to guess, those who did not become squatters would have traveled down the St. John River and went to places like Willow Grove, where there were already Black families established, where there were already Black communities established.
Sure, exactly. Yeah, or the Narapis, where there was a brief Black community before that they went away to start Senegal. Mm-hmm. Joe, listen, I want to thank you very much for your presentation today. This has been hugely informative. I've actually learned quite a bit about the Underground Railroad in this part of Canada. I certainly know about the Underground Railroad from back home, but it's fascinating to learn about it in maritime Canada, particularly in New Brunswick. So again, we want to thank you very much for your time today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you again. And I should also let people know that Joe is actually a member and a founding member of the New Brunswick Black History Society too. So, this is good. Joe, thanks again. And I want to remind everyone that coming up this Monday, we have a presentation at 6 p.m., 6 at night, from entrepreneur Lily Lynch. Lily Lynch, her presentation is called Black Loyalist Herstory, and it's the story of Rose Fortune, who many might know as the namesake of the Digby to St. John Ferry, the Fundy Rose. So join us at 6 p.m. for Lily Lynch. All right. Joe, thank you, and thank you everybody for attending.